Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. There's now less than a week before this year's state budget is due, and usually by this time we sort of know what's on the table and what's not. But this year it's a little fuzzy, and that's because unlike past years, we're not really getting regular updates from lawmakers or the governor. Part of that is the pandemic. People aren't really walking the halls like they used to, and to their credit, leaders from the state legislature took questions from reporters this week on where things stand. But we've also seen this pattern from the Hochul administration of declining to answer questions on major policy issues in public and from the press. This is what she said to reporters this week when they tried to ask her about the state budget.
I've committed to my partners in the legislature that I will not be negotiating the budget in public. So we have 10 more days to go. We're working on it, and that's what I want to say on that.
And since then, Hochul's been negotiating the budget with lawmakers behind closed doors, which isn't all that unusual for Planet Albany. But she's hit a snag with a surprise 10-point public safety plan that she now wants in a final budget deal by the end of the month. And she's been trying to build support for that plan in the last few days. But it looks like that might not be enough to convince lawmakers. Daryl Camp reports.
There's less than a week left before the state budget is due, but the future of one hot-button issue could not be less clear. That issue is the state's bail reform law. Bail reform went into effect back in 2020 and eliminated cash bail for most non-violent criminal offenses. Since then, crime has gone up in New York and across the country. Opponents of bail reform have attempted to link those two things, saying the law is responsible for higher rates of crime. Supporters say that's not true, and there has been no nonpartisan statistical analysis that ties the rise in crime to bail reform. But the conversation around bail reform changed last week after an internal crime plan from the Hochul administration was leaked to the press. The plan would give judges more power to hold someone before trial for certain felonies and gun crimes. Hochul confirmed that plan to reporters this week, but she said she would not speak about it with the press.
I know this is very interesting to the media, but I do know that New Yorkers are most interested in results, and I know how to get results.
Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin is taking the lead on negotiating public safety with lawmakers and had a meeting to talk it out with them this week. While he initially declined to answer questions from the media on bail reform, he later apologized and told reporters that conversations on the plan were still ongoing.
I was a part of bail reform 1 and 2. We believe it's a good thing. We also believe, given what we're seeing, that there are some amendments that should be a part of that. But remember, this is a public safety plan that is broader than bail reform. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about issues of pretrial services.
The plan is relevant for budget talks because parts of it include funding for things like pretrial services. But the non-monetary items in the plan have prompted a strong reaction from lawmakers. Among them is Assemblymember Latrice Walker, one of the architects of the original plan that passed back in 2019. She said there's been a wave of misinformation about bail reform since it was enacted and that lawmakers shouldn't play into that.
But every time we look at the media and the news, we are seeing cases that are bail eligible not receiving bail because judicial advocacy is happening at its worst. The judges do not want to see bail reform work, just like the PBA, just like the Sergeant Benevolent Association, just like the police commissioners.
Walker is also against judicial discretion for bail, which is something many Republicans have called for in recent months. But not all Democrats are of like mind when it comes to possible changes. Long Island Senator Todd Kaminsky, who ran for Nassau County District Attorney last year, says there should be room to refine existing laws.
So people certainly use it as a weapon and make false facts about it, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some important things that need to be addressed. I believe that no one should be having a hard line.
And while Democrats are split on the issue, Republicans have been largely united against the current bail reform laws. They've called for judges to have more discretion to hold someone before trial based on their perceived threat to public safety. And it is playing into this year's elections as well. Congressman Lee Zeldin, who's the Republican nominee for governor, says that Hochul is not taking the issue seriously.
Yesterday, the Speaker of the Assembly and the Senate Majority Leader made it clear that they don't have the will to do the right thing here. So strategically, she has really left all New Yorkers in a bind.
The leaders in both houses do seem open to negotiations, but they are casting doubts on an agreement being reached during budget talks with the deadline so close. Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie.
Members are willing to talk about all of these issues, but I just don't know if 2.5 days is enough time.
Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins says that opponents of bail reform have mischaracterized its impact on public safety, but did tell reporters this week that if they find ways to improve the law, they would be open to that.
But in the intervening days, I will continue, and my conference will continue to do what we think is right for the people of New York State. And I believe that if we continue to do that, we will transcend politics, especially politics of lies.
With just days left before the state budget is due, it won't be long before we know what's in that plan. But will that plan include changes to bail reform? Well, we won't know until then. For New York Now, I'm Daryl Camp in Albany.